In today's vocational vocabulary lesson, we're going to be going over pay stubs and timesheets, two incredibly important aspects of once you are working, how you calculate how much you've earned, and how you keep track of the hours that you've worked. So, what is a pay stub? Well, a pay stub is a nifty paper document that breaks down your paycheck. Your paycheck, of course, is how much you've earned for a given work period. Paychecks and pay stubs can be paid out weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, depending upon your job. So for the most part, it will probably be either bi-weekly or monthly. If you're a salaried worker, it's usually monthly. If you are a non-full-time worker, then it'll typically be bi-weekly installments where you'll receive your pay stub as well as your paycheck on the same document. So a pay stub just details how many hours you worked, your salary or your hourly wage, your gross pay, the deductions taken out of your gross pay, which include federal and state taxes, health insurance, potentially if you do receive that benefit, Social Security, as well as Medicare, things like that, and your net pay. Okay, so your net pay is basically what is shown on your actual paycheck, okay? What you would typically deposit into your bank account, unless you have direct deposit, in which case your pay stub is just, it's a paper document for you to keep track of. So here's another example of a pay stub, okay? These are, of course, all fictitious. So you can Google these online and you'll find them. A pay stub, again, has a lot of information, so it can feel like a lot to process, but once you get used to looking for the most important information, right, you kind of develop a pattern and it becomes easier to analyze and to figure out, the most important aspects of your pay stub and paycheck. All right, so as I said, pay stubs have a lot of information, right? It seems like a lot of words, a lot of numbers. It can feel overwhelming. But it's really important to keep pay stubs. I recommend keeping your pay stub for 1 year as a good rule of thumb and review them periodically, okay? Make sure that it is an accurate reflection of the amount of hours that you worked for a given pay period, that it is an accurate reflection of your hourly wage or your salary. And if you notice any discrepancies or any wrong information or anything that looks incorrect, immediately report this to your manager to correct the situation, okay? So things like if it lists the incorrect number of hours you worked, okay? If it has more hours or less hours than you actually worked, you definitely want to make sure that you go to your manager and clarify that, especially if it lists more hours, because it can feel like you're getting a lot of money, but oftentimes when companies get audited, they will go back, review their files, and they'll see, oh, we overpaid you, and they'll charge you or deduct that money that they overpaid you from your next paycheck. So in reality, you're not really getting more money. They're going to fix the situation either way. But if you let your boss or manager know immediately, it looks good. It reflects good on your character, and also it kind of saves you some time, right? Things like the incorrect number of hours and incorrect hourly wage. So if you got a raise and it's still reflecting your previous wage that you were earning per hour, definitely get that checked so that you are receiving the appropriate amount of money that you deserve, okay? And a lot of times companies can retroactively pay you. So if they forgot to include your increased salary on the previous paycheck, the next paycheck will include that difference in the total net pay, which is kind of cool. Okay, so reading a pay stub, these are the most important information pieces that you'll want to look out for, okay? So your gross pay. Your gross pay is the number of hours you worked multiplied by your hourly wage or your hourly salary, okay? So this is how much you have earned before taxes and deductions. So your gross pay is going to look like a lot. It's going to, be substantially more than your net pay, which is unfortunate. However, it is because your net pay, which is your take-home pay, it's how much you've earned after taxes and deductions, okay? And so you might be thinking, who is federal taxes or who is state income tax? And why am I Why are they taking so much of my paycheck? Well, as citizens, we pay state and federal taxes on all wages earned. This helps support local and federal infrastructure, okay, including schools, roadways, your municipal government, etc. So, taxes can feel, I don't want to say like a burden, but they can feel unfair sometimes, right? But just know that it all goes towards keeping society stable. And so taxes are a good thing. There is other deductions, okay? So depending upon what your company offers and what you elect to include as deductions, this might include retirement, okay? If you have a 401k or 403b, childcare, if your company offers that and it gets taken from your salary, and other costs that are ultimately voluntarily taken from your paycheck, okay? So you opt to include these deductions. If you don't want childcare provided by your workplace, then you would have to find it otherwise, which honestly can be a lot more expensive. So I would definitely suggest comparing rates when it comes to retirement plans, childcare plans, other deductions that are taken out of your paycheck. That way you get the best value for your money. Okay? It can include benefits. Benefits will be listed on your pay stub if you are entitled to sick leave or vacation days and you end up using some of it. Such use, i.e. the days, the hours that you decide to, utilize, will be noted on your pay stub so that you are paid for the time off. Okay, so if you take a day off because you're not feeling well, that's 7 hours that would be deducted from your sick leave bank. And so under your benefit section, it will list down the current amount of hours left and then your year to date. Okay, so how many you've used so far. And of course, YTD at the very end, year to date, is just a running total of how much you've earned for that tax year thus far. Okay, so when you get to your net pay and it says year to date, you might think, oh my gosh, I've earned so much money. Well, that's not money you've earned all at once, right? That's how much you've earned each paycheck, each pay period, and that adds up over time. So most important thing really is your net pay. That's your take-home pay. That is what you will actually receive in your bank account, okay? So make sure to look over your pay stub, check for any discrepancies or incorrect information, and immediately report it to your manager so that HR and your accounting department can get it handled and taken care of. All right, so now we're on to a timesheet. What is a timesheet? A timesheet is a paper or digital document used to keep track of the hours and days that you worked at your job. A timesheet will include each day that you were scheduled to work, the time that you clocked in, which is when you arrive to work and you start working, the time that you clock out, what time you officially leave work, and the total hours worked for that day, minus lunch and breaks, which really depends on how many hours you work. If you work 7 to 8 hours, you get a lunch included, and sometimes you will have breaks included as well. Timesheets are incredibly important as they are used to calculate your paycheck. Okay, so whatever is listed on your timesheet, whether it's a paper or digital document, that will be used to figure out how much money you're going to receive, okay? And so it's important to fill these out correctly, accurately, and honestly. So timesheets, there's so many different formats, so I can't really provide you with a great example of what you'll likely be filling out for your work. It really just depends. But timesheets, in essence, have the same information, okay? The same core information, no matter what type of, the differences and aesthetics that they look like. So just in regards to timesheets in general, make sure that your timesheet has your correct personal information, which will likely include your full name, your job position, your manager or supervisor's name, the timesheet period, which is the weeks for which the timesheet will be filled out, etc. Just like with pay stubs, if you notice any discrepancies, immediately change the information yourself, right? You're filling out a timesheet so you can alter that information. However, if you're unable to modify the form, say it's a digital form and certain areas are locked and therefore you cannot edit them, notify your manager so that they can correct your timesheet through human resources. All right, and the last part, filling out a timesheet. Timesheet should be filled out according to two parameters, two rules. When you are scheduled to work and when you actually showed up for work. So you might be scheduled for a day and you don't go in that day. You cannot put down that you worked that day. That is falsifying information and you can get fired for it or they can fine you. Okay, if you end up getting paid for that day and they go back and audit their records, they can say, wait, you weren't actually here. You owe us now for that day that you stated you were here when you falsely claimed that you were. Please make sure to only mark the times that you were asked to work unless special circumstances arose wherein you were asked to arrive earlier or to stay later by your manager. And so oftentimes, yeah, that happens, right? Your boss might ask you to come in an hour earlier or stay an hour later. As long as you have the okay from your boss, that's fine. It's okay to go above and beyond your scheduled time as long as the appropriate authorities, your boss, manager, whoever is in charge, your supervisor, as long as they know and they, agree to that, then you can change the time on your timesheet to reflect that you arrived earlier and you were working an hour earlier, or you, stayed later and you worked later than your scheduled shift. So information that will always be on a timesheet, the date. The date is just the day that you were scheduled to work and for which you actually showed up to work, okay? So maybe it's, Tuesday, February 16th, today, right? Maybe you were scheduled to work today. You would put down the date written in, day, month, year format. All right, your time in. Your time in is when you arrived at work ready to begin working. So just because you arrived to work early doesn't automatically mean that you can write down that you arrived that early. You have to be working, right? You have to be on the clock in order to be paid. So I could put down that, yes, I arrived at 7:30, but I didn't start working until 8. And so I can't write down 7:30. I have to write down 8 o'clock. That's when my shift started. That is when I officially began my capacities, my responsibilities as an employee. The timeout is when you stopped fulfilling your job duties and left work. Total time. This refers to the total amount of hours you worked in a given shift for a given day, minus your lunch or your breaks. And that all depends on how long you work. Once you get hired at a job, they will spend a day going over paperwork and they will tell you how to fill out the timesheets forms that they have. Employee signature. This is really important. This is where you sign your name to attest that the information on the timesheet is true and accurate. Okay, so when your signature's on it, that's you basically saying, I looked over this information, it is true and accurate to the best of my knowledge. And then total hours at the bottom, it's where you add up all hours from the total time column, and this determines your total hours worked for that timesheet period. Okay, so if you worked 5 days and you worked 8 hours each day, you would, add up 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8, right? Add up 8 5 times. And so your total hours for that week would be 40 hours, which is a full-time job. And so when you get paid, depending upon what your hourly wage is, it would be 40 hours multiplied by the hourly wage, say it's $15, and that would be your gross pay right there. 40 hours times 15, whatever the product is, okay? Now, again, your gross pay isn't what you actually take home. You would, of course, have to account for your deductions, right? Taxes, Social Security, Medicare, things like that. And eventually you would arrive at your net pay, which is your take-home pay.